Hi, welcome to NFW. This is Jenny Durand, your host speaking. This episode will be an excerpt from my book, Wolfe, Book 1 of the Constantine Brothers. 1. Nissa. Nissa was 19 years old when she married a stranger and immigrated to the United States. Her world flipped on its head, and she had to figure out how to survive. Young and inexperienced, she had to learn a whole new language and adapt to a new way of life. Both things she did with relative ease, thanks to the support of her husband. He helped her learn English and fill out the paperwork for school. She had a good enough grasp on the language to read it, but it was months before she could comfortably carry a conversation. For such a hard-headed man, he had a surprising amount of patience when it mattered. Nissa brushed her hair to the side and continued to walk down the hall. When he brought her to this country, he told her he wanted her to succeed. He did everything he could to help her. 4 years of tuition, a small compact car, and a small apartment near campus for the two of them. He never missed an immigration appointment or made her feel like a burden. He was a good husband before he did the disappearing act. Wolfe took care of her, and when she could stand on her own 2 feet, he left. A move she would never understand or agree with, but one she had to accept. Their marriage was far from traditional. It wasn't some great love story. Wolfe was not the Prince Charming type. He was not into romantics. They weren't lovers, but she thought they were friends. The last thing she expected was for him to completely disappear from her life. It took her a long time to accept that he wasn't coming back. Wolfe wasn't good with goodbyes. He was used to losing things long before he was ready to let go. This morning, she got a call from the hospital, informing her that her estranged husband was there and needed someone to pick him up. Nissa didn't hesitate. We weren't sure who to call. He didn't have much on him at the time of the accident. His phone was locked, and he couldn't give us the code. But we found his dog tags and called Arlington. They gave us your name, the nurse explained as she led her down the hall. He was found by park rangers outside of his tent. We think he tripped and hit his head on a rock. He had a touch of hypothermia, but he has made a full recovery in the last 3 days. She hadn't seen Wolfe in 3 or 4 years? Not since she graduated from nursing school. He didn't even know she had gone back to school and gotten her master's. He took care of her long enough for her to be able to take care of herself. Maybe she shouldn't have come. Maybe he would not be happy to see her. Wolfe Constantine was her hero. He had been one to her from the beginning. 10 years older than her, he took her under his wing and helped her build a new life. He never let her thank him or pay him back. He just said it was what Jacques would want him to do. Jacques, her older brother, and the person who raised her after their parents died. There was not a day that went by where she didn't think about him. A translator for the military, he sacrificed everything to provide for her after their deaths. When he died, he sent Wolfe to take her across the finish line. Nibbling on her bottom lip, she nervously asked, "Has he spoken to anyone since he was brought in?" It had been a long time since they had been in the same room together. He probably had a whole new life. He probably had a girlfriend. Wolfe had always been clear on his less than favorable views on marriage. But he was a handsome man. There would not be a shortage of women willing to take him in. They probably thought they could change him. Nissa had thought the same thing the first time around. She wanted to be the one to heal him and make everything good for him again. The nurse stopped walking and turned to look her in the eyes. He has. And? He couldn't give you the name of anyone else to call? Crossing her arms, the blonde nurse frowned before saying, I don't want to alarm you, but it seems he has been having some memory issues. If you don't mind me asking, how long have you two been married? 8 years. The nurse nodded and resumed walking. He may not remember you, but the neurologist thinks it is temporary, a result of the swelling after his fall. She made a mental note to make time to speak to the neurologist herself. If that is the case, are you sure he is ready to be released? Nodding, she turned the corner. Physically, Mr. Constantine is well on the road to recovery. He will receive follow-up care from Dr. O'Brien. Wolfe was used to living out of a suitcase. He didn't settle anywhere for long. She had barely scratched the surface in the few years they had lived together. He was always traveling for work, and when he wasn't traveling for work, he went camping or fishing. Anything that got him out of the house and into nature. Walking down the cold antiseptic hospital halls, Nissa thought about who she could call to help take care of him. Wolfe wasn't close to his family. From what she remembered, he barely spoke to his siblings. She knew nothing about his parents. He had brought her around his brothers a handful of times, but she was not close to them. She didn't even have any of their numbers. He didn't ask you to call his family? Stopping in front of a hospital door, the nurse shook her head. He insisted we not call them. We can have him discharged in a few hours, but we need someone to discharge him too. He's so stubborn. Yeah, we've all noticed. He's been driving all of the nurses crazy. Nissa grinned. That sounded like her husband. The one time she tried to nurse him after he had surgery on his knee, she felt like she was dealing with a rambunctious toddler. He just refused to sit still. She would sit him on their couch with the remote and instructions to relax, and he would wait until her back was turned to try and go somewhere. She learned to be creative when trying to get what she wanted from him. Wolfe didn't take orders, he gave them. If she wanted him to listen, she had to give him something he wanted in return. Usually, it was food. Part 2. Wolfe. Wolfe heard the door to his hospital room open and forced himself to sit up. He'd been clicking on the button to call the nurse for the last 5 minutes. They had begun to ignore him. He was driving them a bit crazy, and he knew it. Other than a bit of soreness, he was ready to go home. He had never really liked hospitals. The smell and the sounds were nauseating enough. Mr. Constantine, your wife is here to see you. He frowned. Wife? He wasn't married. It was not a look he could or would want to pull off. He needed freedom in order to function. Nurse Maureen had been the bane of his existence since he woke up in her care. The blonde bombshell was completely immune to him. Every time he tried to flirt with her, she would smile and continue on with her shift. She didn't listen to a word he said and refused to fall for any of his charm. I'm not married, Maureen. Yeah, you are, she replied as she led an average-height woman with brown skin and striking hazel eyes into the room. Smirking, he shook his head. You have been misinformed. I'm not married, Maureen. No one is dumb enough to say yes to me. The woman beside Maureen smirked and walked up to the foot of his bed. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place where he had seen her before. She wasn't wearing scrubs, so she couldn't be one of his nurses. Maybe she lived in his building or in his neighborhood. Wolfe readjusted himself and smiled in her direction. Are you one of my new caretakers? Actually, I am your wife, the woman replied as she stepped forward and held out her hand. I know you don't remember me, so allow me to introduce myself. I am Nissa Constantine. His smile faded as his eyes widened. Wow, these drugs really are something. The woman grinned. I see you still have your sense of humor. Wow, you are a knockout. I have to tell you, I have never met you before. I don't have a wife, Wolfe informed her with a deprecating smile. Chuckling, Nissa turned towards the nurse. I would appreciate it if you could give my husband and I a moment. The blonde nurse nodded and slipped out of the room. Wolfe frowned and stared at the woman claiming to be his wife. He was never going to get married. He loved his way too much to be weighed down by a wife. He rarely spent more than 2 months in the same country, let alone the state. He'd be a nightmare as a husband. Nissa walked up to his bed and leaned on the plastic railing at the end of it. I know you don't remember me, but we are married. He frowned. What game are you playing at? She pulled his file out of the bucket by her and started flipping through the pages. You should have asked them to call your brothers, or your parents. I know you don't talk to them often, but you can't be alone right now. You need someone looking out for you. Maybe one of them could help with your memory problems. He wasn't close to the people in his family. You never know. I know none of them have been a part of my life for a long time, he stated as his mind struggled to wrap around who she said she was. There was no way he would get married. He wasn't the marrying type. You were working on that the last time I saw you. We talked about you getting closer to your brothers. Yeah, right. Nissa looked up from his file. We spent a few holidays with the boys. I cooked dinner for the 4 of you a few times. To believe that, I would have to believe you are my wife. I am your wife. Then why weren't you with me when I got hurt? Nissa snorted in surprise. Even if we had seen each other in a while, I wouldn't have been with you. It doesn't sound like we are very close. Some of the light faded from her gaze as she stared across at him. We have been separated for the last 3 years. Now that sounded right. He didn't feel married. He wasn't wearing a wedding ring. So you are my ex-wife. Shaking her head, her dark brown curls bounced. Nope. We never initiated divorce proceedings. I am your legal wife, and you are my legal husband. Which, lucky for you, is why they are willing to release you into my custody. He stared at her, unsure what he had to make of all this. As much as he wanted to get out of here, he wasn't sure how comfortable he was leaving with a stranger. Even if she was tooth-achingly beautiful, standing there in a pair of fitted stone-washed jeans and a bright yellow short-sleeve button-down, he could see why he may have fallen for her. A beautiful woman could be as dangerous as a well-trained man. Maybe they got drunk one night in Vegas. I'm sorry, would you be willing to answer a few personal questions? She nodded. Ask away. Favorite color? Black, Nissa answered as she circled the bed and sat by his feet. How many siblings do I have? 3 brothers, Roman, Aiden, Liam, Constantine. Roman owns his own architecture firm downtown. Liam is a doctor with the Peace Corps. Aiden owns a working ranch. I've been there once. It was beautiful. Wolfe frowned. Some of the information made sense, but some did not. Roman was an architect, but the last time they spoke, he hadn't owned his own firm yet. Liam was just finishing up medical school last time they spoke. Aiden did own a ranch. He inherited it from his adoptive parents. Out of the 3, which one is married? Roman was. His wife died soon after we got married. I only met her once. Claire had been diagnosed with a particularly aggressive cancer. They had all known it would be a difficult fight, but he didn't know she died. Roman had been in love with her for years. How did we meet? Nissa put his chart down and crossed her arms over her chest before answering. My brother Jacques. Wolfe's brows jumped up. That was a name he knew. The translator for his unit was a Haitian man named Jacques. He was always smiling and talking about his baby sister. They could never get him to shut up about her. According to him, she was the definition of perfection. I remember a man named Jacques. He was a translator for my unit. He introduced us? She started to look uncomfortable, and her eyes shifted to the wall behind his shoulders. You were the one who came to tell me he died. The two of you were friends. Her eyes adopted a bit of a shine. He could hear the pain in her voice. For her, it was still fresh. He knew that kind of pain. He had lost plenty of people in his life. Byproduct of the job. The two of you were close? She looked him in the eyes and nodded. He raised me after our parents died. An orphan, dead parents, and a sibling. Was that their connection? His father may not be dead, but he might as well be after what he did. I am sorry for your loss. She shrugged. It is a lot easier to talk about now. In the beginning, I couldn't say his name without sobbing. He was all I had left. Your only family? She reached out and touched the top of his covered feet. Until I married you. Then you became my family. She was looking at him so intently he could tell family meant a lot to her. What was she doing with a guy like him? Why would he let her get close to him? He was toxic on a good day, and the last thing she needed was toxic. He and his brothers weren't that close. They loved each other, but they each had their own interests. He was the oldest, and had always been interested in traveling. Wolfe joined the army right out of high school. But we are separated? She shook her head and smiled at him. That doesn't mean we aren't family. You and I agreed from the beginning that we were going to support each other. When you left, it wasn't much of a surprise. You were never very good about sitting still. True. He believed her. She was his wife. He was a married man with no memory of ever being married. She had not been in the room with him long, but he could tell that she was far out of his league. Even if he had lost his mind and proposed, why would she ever agree to tie herself to him? If we haven't seen each other in 3 years, how did the hospital know to contact you? Your military file still lists me as your emergency contact. You are lucky I never changed my number. He sighed. I still can't believe I'm not on active duty anymore. You hurt your leg. They had to put a few pins in, Nissa said as she slid her hand up his leg and touched his left knee. The touch sent bolts of electricity through him. He shifted uncomfortably, and she immediately pulled away. Taking a deep breath, she scratched behind her right ear as she said, You could either take a medical discharge or desk duty. You took the medical discharge and opened your own security firm with a few of the other men in your unit. I'm doing private security? She nodded. They won't discharge you without someone willing to take responsibility for you. I'm going to take you home and stay with you for a couple of days. If you are too uncomfortable, I am sure I could find any one of your brother's numbers somewhere. That was the last thing he needed. I just need to get out of here. Your driver's license should have your address. I'll take you right there. You should be around your stuff. Maybe it will spark something in your memory. Right, because they didn't live together. He left her, yet she was willing to take care of him. He couldn't help asking his next question. Why are you willing to take care of me? She slipped onto her feet. You took care of me. I wouldn't be in this country without you. You brought me here and helped me rebuild my life. I owe you. Thank you for listening to Chapter 1 of my book, Wolfe, Book 1 of the Constantine Brothers series. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share. Have a great day.